Undoubtedly, we shall have subsequent hearings and request the appearance of administration officials to explain their role in the case of Mayor Arah, because justice demands no less. Last April, our subcommittee, along with the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe, held a hearing where we heard from representatives of the European Parliament who had issued a report that was highly critical of the collaboration of European governments with the Bush administration's policy of so-called extraordinary rendition. They testified that transatlantic relations have suffered as a result, and that this program accounts in no small measure for the low standing of the United States in terms of European public opinion, which we can ill afford. Because, as the Government Accountability Office observed, such adverse foreign public opinion is important. It threatens American national security in 4 ways. By increasing foreign public support for terrorism directed at Americans, by impacting the cost and effectiveness of military operations, by weakening the United States' ability to align with other nations in pursuit of common policy objectives, and last, by dampening foreign enthusiasm for U.S. business services and products. So it's not simply a popularity contest. It's about our vital national interests. For those unfamiliar with the term extraordinary rendition, I'm referring to the practice where individuals suspected of links to al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations are seized and transferred to countries such as Syria, which, according to the Department of State, systematically and without hesitation utilizes torture. As Michael Scheuer, the former head of the CIA's bin Laden unit, who testified at our previous hearing, said, and I'm quoting him, "It's basically finding someone else to do your dirty work." I asked Mr. Scheuer at that hearing, what about the case of someone who is innocent? His response was, mistakes are made. The rendition of Mayor Arah was just such a mistake, a tragic mistake that, befitting American justice and values, demands acknowledgement and redress. The facts of Mr. Arah's case are profoundly disturbing. Rather than kidnapping someone off the streets in one country and bringing him to another for interrogation, our government took Mr. Arah into custody at JFK Airport on U.S. soil while awaiting a connecting flight on his way home to Canada. The administration would have you believe this is nothing more than an expedited removal under our immigration law. Don't be fooled. This was not simply an immigration matter. He was detained in New York, interrogated relentlessly, and denied an opportunity to make a single phone call for 7 days. Over his objections, and without notice to Canada, he was placed on a private airplane, flown to Jordan, and then driven to Syria, a country he last lived in as a teenager. There he was tortured and kept in a grave-like cell for the majority of his year-long detention. He was never charged with a crime, never given a hearing, never afforded due process as we understand that concept. After the Canadian government obtained his release, it conducted its own review of the matter, consistent with that critical democratic principle of accountability. the independently constituted RA Commission spent 2.5 years investigating the matter and produced an exhaustive factual report and policy review. Justice Dennis O'Connor, the commissioner of the inquiry, concluded, and I quote, "There is no evidence that Mr. Arra was ever linked to terrorist groups, and I am able to say categorically that there is no evidence to indicate that Mr. Arra has committed any offense or that his activities constitute a threat to the security of Canada." Based on the Commission's recommendation, the Canadian government apologized to and compensated Mr. Arra for its role in the rendition. That role involved providing raw intelligence without caveats to the U.S. government that identified him as an Islamic extremist suspected of being linked to al-Qaeda, an allegation which had no basis in fact. However, there was no evidence that Canadian officials participated or acquiesced in the American authorities' decision to detain Mr. Arra and remove him to Syria. Therefore, the Commission, the Iraq Commission in Canada, recommended that Canadian officials request that the U.S. government apologize and remove Mr. Arra from its no-fly list. But when faced with such a request from one of our closest allies, the Bush administration did neither, nor did they provide an explanation for its decision to send Mr. Arra to Syria rather than Canada, as he had requested. This provoked outrage, understandably so, in Canada. And according to another poll, a staggering 71% of Canadians hold a negative opinion of U.S. foreign policy. And is it a coincidence that shortly after this poll, Canada refused to participate in the expansion of our ballistic missile defense system? The government of Prime Minister Martin notified the United States that while it would continue to be part of the NORAD warning system, it would not be taking part in that expansion. The refusal of the Bush administration to be held accountable stands in sharp contrast to the actions of the Canadian government and is an embarrassment to many of us. I would note the testimony of former Attorney General Gonzalez as especially appalling. He stated that Mr. Arra's removal to Syria was legal since we had received diplomatic assurances from Syria that Mr. Arra would not be mistreated. From Syria, the same country that President Bush cited for its legacy of torture, oppression, misery, and ruin, and that the State Department routinely condemns in its yearly country reports for torture. Let me suggest that that is the height of hypocrisy. A country that we condemn for torture, we trust to abide by a pro forma, unenforceable diplomatic assurance not to torture. We betrayed our core values in this matter, values that Americans and Canadians share, values that set us apart among the family of nations and gives us a claim to moral authority inherent in great democracies. So, Mr. Arra, let me personally give you what our government has not, an apology. Let me apologize to you and to the Canadian people for our government's role in this mistake. We regard Canada as a true and trusted ally and friend. My hope is that this hearing will demonstrate our commitment to those shared values that bind us together in this special friendship. Before introducing our witnesses, let me turn to my friend and ranking member on this subcommittee, Dana Rohrabacher, for his opening statement.